Now, I understand. I do understand that there is a huge human temptation to believe that if people are not afraid, they won't obey. And when I talk about this in several nations in the world, meeting with pastors and talk about these verses, when we do question and answer, invariably, I mean, you can just count on it. One of the first questions that will be asked is, wait a minute, you're saying that we don't have to be afraid of God. But if we're not afraid of God, we won't obey Him. Now here's my question. How's that working for you? How's that fear empowers me to obey? How's that working? If fear empowered human beings to obey, Israel in the wilderness would be the most obedient people you ever saw. But the reality is, fear is a motivator, but it is not an empowerer. It's probably not even a word, I just made it up. But you get the point. You see, Paul says the problem with the old covenant is that it was weak in that it depended on human effort. But he says the new covenant is not like that. It's made on better promises. It's made on Colossians 1:27, Christ in you, the hope of glory. Fear must be put away in the life of a believer. It must be dealt with. Because until it is, you and I will never be free from condemnation. You say, wait a minute, we're supposed to fear the Lord. The fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom. Listen, when we deal with these words, we have to come up with definition. We have to understand, what do these words mean? Definition is very, very important. Linda was just with me in Indonesia. And Indonesian food can be really, really hot. Now over here in the States, when we eat food that's got lots of hot pepper in it, we say, ooh, that's hot. But now we have a problem. Because if we eat food that just came out of the microwave and it burns our tongue because it's heat hot, we say, ooh, that's hot. Well, wait a minute, what does hot mean? Well, it depends on the context in which you use it. The fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom, Proverbs says. For example, I taught my children from a very, very early age to be afraid of fire. But I don't want them to break out in a sweat every time somebody lights a scented candle. The fear of what fire can do, if I do not relate to it correctly, will keep me acting wisely. But if I'm going to relate to God correctly, I've got to start where He starts. I've got to believe what He says about Himself. Now here's what He says about Himself. 1 John chapter 4. God is love. There is no fear in love. For perfect love drives out all fear. And he who still fears is not yet perfected in God's love. There's only one word in Hebrew for the word fear. It's used two very specific ways. Sometimes it's used to mean the terrifying fear of a judge executing the penalty or the judgment. However, the same Hebrew word is also used in a son reverencing his father. Same word. So how do we know the difference? Context. Context. We give definition. Now, see, in Asia, they've solved the hot problem. Because when something's hot, that means it's heat hot. But if something's hot because of peppers, they don't say it's hot. They say it's spicy. So when you're with us on a missions trip and somebody says, don't eat that, it's spicy. Don't eat it. Because what they really mean is, it'll take you months to regrow the skin on your tongue and your throat. But see, when we say hot, it can mean either one. It can be hot because it came out of the microwave, or it can be hot because it's got a lot of jalapenos. Cayenne. So how do we know that? Context, 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 context. So what God wants to do is free us from the motivating factor of fear. Now why? Well, if He takes away that motivating factor, what are we left with? We are left with God living inside of us. And we Christians, generally speaking, have not yet learned to rest in relating to the God who's living inside of us. I'm just learning. I'm a baby in this. Because for years I believed something else. But let me tell you, if Romans 8:11 is absolutely true, if the same Spirit which raised Christ from the dead lives in you, then He shall put life inside of your mortal body. There is no greater motivator to righteousness than the righteous one living inside of us.